My name is Stephen Chappé. So this project kicked off in 2021. We're at the point now where we have draft maps that are ready for you all to review and look at. And really, that's the big takeaway from this meeting is we want your feedback on those maps. Well, like I said, my name is Stephen Chappé. I was the project manager from the DNR side of things for this project. I'm engineer by trade, so did a lot of the reviews on it as well. Then I have Ryan Stastny here. Can you introduce himself?
I'm Ryan Stastny. I'm with Nebraska Department of Natural Resources as well. I'm a GIS technician. I primarily do mapping projects such as this one. This was a contract project though, so my primary role in this project was review.
And then we have Erin sitting over there as well.
I'm Erin. I am the outreach coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources. You can pretty much turn to me for any questions related to ordinances, permitting, that kind of thing.
All right, and then we have a couple of people online. I'll have them introduce themselves if we have things working.
Yeah, Brock and Jason, feel free to chime in.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, okay. This is Brock Remus. I'm from FEMA Region 7. I'm the program manager overseeing the state of Nebraska. So I'm here to join in and answer questions as needed.
And I'm Jason Schneider with Stantec, and we were the contractor for the Nebraska DNR on this project.
Everyone hear that? Jason was the project manager from Stantec, the contractor that was working on this project, and then Brock Remus is with FEMA Region 7, who oversees Nebraska. So Stantec consulting firm, and then FEMA as well. And then if we could just do a quick introduction, name and what community you're representing for everyone else that's here. We'll start in the back there.
Lawrence Ball from Gordon, Nebraska.
Okay.
John Bates from Gordon, James Close, Sheridan County Floodplain Administrator. Kurt Megan, Rushville. Roy Retzlaff, Clinton Village.
Amanda Eller, Rushville.
Right. Well, again, thank you all for taking time out of your day for this. I have a little bit of slides, but most of the time I want to spend looking at the maps and showing you how to use our interactive map. And then Erin will talk a little bit about some of the mitigation piece of things and the regulation side as well. But first, a little bit of intro why we do this work. The main reason is to protect life and property where it's most at risk from flooding. So we know there's a long history of flooding in the state of Nebraska. Historic flooding in the Republican River in 1935 kind of kicked off the National Flood Insurance Program and flood mitigation as a statewide concept. Back in our backyard in the 1950s, we had some historic flooding in the University Place neighborhood near downtown Lincoln. Or not quite downtown, but Longhorn was good. Then the Missouri River had historic flooding both in 2011 and 2019. I'm sure you guys probably were dealing more with snow in 2019, whereas the eastern half of the state, we were all underwater, it seemed. So it wasn't just the Missouri, it was widespread that year. I also just took some newspaper clippings from the Alliance local newspaper back in 1920 and 21 and just posted them on here just for a little local flavor for you guys. So why we need to update your flood maps? They haven't been updated since the late 70s. They're some of the, maybe the oldest maps, lots viewed in both Sheridan County. Some of the oldest floodplain maps in the state. They were adopted for flood insurance rating purposes in 2008, but that data didn't change. They were just essentially adopted to rate flood insurance. Okay. So this is what the current maps in Sheridan County look like. If you're familiar with them, they're hard to read. You have to get out the physical copy to actually use them. With our new maps, they'll be fully digital. You can actually get on our interactive site and use that as the regulatory product. You don't have to get out a physical paper map. You still will receive physical firm panels that you can use as an option if you prefer that as well. So the new maps, anywhere we have that 1% annual chance flooding, will be what's sort of dictating where that federal requirement is for flood insurance purchases if you have a federally backed mortgage. It's also the basis for updating your floodplain management ordinance. Anytime we have new maps coming out, it's a good time to look at your ordinances and update them as you see fit, and Aaron's the person to talk to if you want to be doing that. But that ordinance is really your community's tool for reducing your risk in those flood-prone areas. So what we really want to accomplish today is just help you understand your community's flood risk, get feedback from you on the draft maps. Today, we're really just showing you how to make comments or review those draft maps. And then hopefully we can send you home with the tools that you can review them on your own time. There will be an official 30-day window that FEMA sort of sets for this review period. And you'll get an official letter in the mail probably end of this week, early next week, stating when the end of that period is. It's not a hard deadline on our end, so if you are still reviewing maps past that date, you can still reach out to us and be in communication with us. But at some point, we do have to kind of cut that off. So that's the big takeaway from this meeting, and then we'll wrap it up with what your role in the process is. So where we've been so far, not a lot going on. We kicked off this project way back in 2021. It was a fully virtual meeting. That was in the height of when we weren't traveling at all or doing anything in person. And we've essentially just been working behind the scenes, doing all the engineering work, and now we have data to present to you and get feedback on. So H&H was the main engineering piece of it, and then from there we actually take that engineering data to create a map or a boundary on the map. It took another year, which was just completed earlier in May of this year. And then we have some additional data that's not regulatory, which we call flood risk products, that are also on our interactive map, and I'll show you what those are as well. But there's things such as depth grids. Rather than just a line on a map, you can actually see what the depth of flooding would be in different locations. And all of this work was completed through DNR with contractor with Stantec, but all that funding was provided by FEMA grants. This is a visual of where we are in the process. So again, that kickoff meeting was back in 2021. This was sort of all the engineering piece, the creating the maps that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And now we're at this flood risk review meeting where we have draft maps. Again, I'm going to emphasize this is the time when you comment. Once we get past this preliminary map production phase, the maps are considered preliminary. And to change the maps at that point would require some sort of data or engineering analysis to kind of disprove what the maps are showing. So it's going to take a lot more time and effort on your part if we get further down the line and there's something in the maps that you think needs to change because of some work that was done or whatever it may be. After that, when the maps go preliminary, we'll have another meeting, which we call the CCO meeting, just between DNR, FEMA, and the community officials, just talking about what the next phases are before these maps become effective. So there'll be an appeal period. That's 90 days. That's where the maps can be appealed. If you have an engineering study saying, hey, this isn't actually what things look like, we have an updated study that could replace this. And there's this period from preliminary to effective is usually about 2 years, I want to say. So we're still a few years out from these maps. And then at the end of all of this, I mentioned a little bit before, but we will have ordinance updates that will need to be done to officially adopt the new maps as your regulatory floodplains. So this is just acknowledging, I think we have almost everyone here, maybe not any Springs, but appreciate again all of you showing up for this. Okay, I don't want to get too into the weeds on how the maps get made, but I just want to kind of emphasize a little bit how things used to be done versus how things are done currently. So up until maybe 5 years ago or so is when we started making the switch from doing what's called one-dimensional modeling, where you're looking at modeling on a stream-by-stream basis. With this study and all of our studies going forward, we're using a more holistic approach, or what we call 2D study, where you're essentially dropping rainfall over an entire area and letting the model route the water for you. And then from there, just picking out certain criteria for what actually ends up being that regulatory boundary for the 100-year floodplain. If you want more details on that, I can talk to you about it outside of this meeting and get into the weeds with you if you're interested. But Anyway, it's going to look a little bit different than what you've seen before. There'll be, especially the southern, portion of the county is sandhills, right? So this traditional method doesn't work too well when you're just dealing with those ponding areas. Whereas if we're just dropping rain over an area, it naturally just collects, and we can model that a lot easier with this method. So other regulatory, or the main regulatory products that we create are the flood insurance study. That's going to be the report that kind of summarizes everything that went into this study. And then the other piece is that flood insurance rate map that actually have the boundaries printed on them. I'm going to say this over and over again, but again, this is the time to review the maps. This is the time to provide feedback to us so that we can work with you to, look at the models again, look at certain areas closer that are of interest to you. And update those models and see what we can do. Once they go preliminary, it's going to take a much larger effort for you to get anything changed. So outside of just the regulatory data, I mentioned this before, but we have what are called flood risk products. There are several items that we create and publish on our interactive map as well, including depth grids, percent annual chance grids, and percent 30-year chance grids. So there's those percent chance grids. They give you just a visual of in any given year, what's the likelihood I could see flooding at this property versus this property. So even if two, structures are in the floodplain, they might not have the same flood risk. So this gives you a more granular look at, which one might be at more risk than the other. And then likewise, we have a percent 30-year chance grid. That's the likelihood you could see flooding at that property over a 30-year period, which is the typical life of a mortgage. So for any home buyers, or if you're selling, you could look at a property and maybe there's only, a couple percent chance any given year based on these that you see flooding, but extend that out over 30 years, maybe you're getting close to that 30, 40%, 50% even chance that you could see flooding over the span of that mortgage. Again, these aren't regulatory, they're just additional tools that you can use when talking with individuals about their properties and understanding their flood risk a little better. This is just a quick snapshot. This is Rushville and what those images might look like on our interactive map that you can pull up. So depth grids on the left, and then what those percent chance grids might look like on the right. And this is all just clickable on our interactive map that you can see. Okay, and I'll pull that through in a second, but when you're reviewing the maps, things to look for, areas that you've experienced significant flooding in the past, any properties that have repeated or had repeated flooding are worth commenting on. If you have any development that has occurred since 2017, that's when our elevation data that we used for this project is. So anything that was done after that would not be reflected in our topography that we used for this study. So if you have any known locations in the floodplain that occurred after that event, that would be helpful for us. Any new developments you have planned, areas where you've done mitigation or flood control efforts, are really any area that you've prioritized because of flooding concerns. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here and actually pull up the map. Okay. So after you get to the interactive maps, this top left one just says floodplain interactive map. This is our main page. I already have it loaded up on this other screen, but this will take you here. I have it zoomed in on Rushville right now. And I'll kind of talk through what's all on here if you're unfamiliar. So the two main layers, effective paper map, these are the current effective maps. We've geo-referenced them as best as we can to get them in an interactive setting so that you can compare the two. And then the draft maps that we're asking you to review are under a layer that's called flood awareness area. And your previous maps, they just mapped that 1% or that 100-year floodplain. With the new maps, we're also additionally mapping that 500-year, or what we refer to as the 0.2% annual chance floodplain. That's what that orange boundary is. So the orange boundary does cover much of Rushville, but there's no regulatory purchase requirement for flood insurance in that area. The blue area would be what you're more probably familiar with as far as where that purchase requirement would be. So I think, is this where we are?
Yeah.
Okay. So really just this southwest portion of town that we have that 100-year floodplain coming through here. If I turn on the effective, I think it follows this path a little closely too. And there's some down here.
Well, it's a good thing the city owns all that, huh?
So those are the flood awareness area is the big piece of it that I want you to focus on. I'll show you those flooders products as well. So if you go to the second tab with this little locator icon, there's a couple things. So there's the depth grids for both the 100 and 500 year, and then that percent annual and percent 30-year chance. And while there is flooding through Rushville that we see from our model for that 100-year floodplain, it's still not regulatory because it's so shallow. It essentially got taken out of that regulatory boundary requirement. So if you click through, they'll all be, points essentially a foot, around a foot to less than a foot. And then this got added into the regulatory because it was a little bit deeper and the water's actually starting to move through here.
How do we identify the regulatory boundary? What's that?
Yeah, that is, so you won't be able to see it necessarily for almost all places. It'll match this 100-year depth grid. But for the communities where we had really shallow flooding, it got removed from that regulatory boundary. But if you turn on this flood awareness area, turn this off. This blue area, that's the regulatory that we're proposing with this new study. Yep. And then I'll turn on those percent chance grids as well, just so you can get a sense of what they're. So again, this is over a 30-year period is the one I turned on, the chance that you could see any water at a particular location. So again, you can click around on the map, say you want to look at this property. Over a 30-year period, you could see about a 30 to 32% chance, somewhere in that range, of seeing water at that property. So basically over 30 years, maybe a 1 in 3 chance that property could see some sort of water. This red area is, I think it maxes out at, for the 30-year, it's around 96%. For the annual, I think it maxes out at about 10%. Oops. Why did someone say that? And essentially, that's because we didn't look at any more frequent events than the 10-year event, is what that is. We didn't look at like a 2-year storm or anything like that. So it's constricted to that. So those are the additional layers. Again, those aren't regulatory. Those are just for your own sort of additional data to provide homeowners or yourself, or just make yourself more aware of that flood risk. But the flood awareness area is the big piece that you should be focused on. And if you want to make comments, you can do so on our interactive map. That's probably the easiest way to do it. And this is live right now, so you can go on a computer and do this at any time, or even on your phone, although I wouldn't recommend it on your phone. Probably be pretty slow. But there's this layer called floodplain boundary review comments. If you toggle this on, I don't think there's any comments currently here. There's another tab up here, this guy here, that says floodplain boundary comments. And if you click on this, it allows you to draw a shape, and it'll ask you to, I can just make one here. So if you click this button, you can draw a shape however you like. If you like it, you can hit submit. If you don't, you can hit cancel. If you hit submit, it'll just ask you to put in your contact information and then the comment down here and submit one more time.
This isn't public facing, right? This is
public facing. So anyone, yeah, if you have other people that you want to share this with to review it, by all means, share it with whoever you want. Yeah, and we can get in contact with them if they leave their contact information. If it's a general public user, we might reach out to whoever the floodplain administrator is first and talk to them about it, just so we have one sort of point of contact for each community.
So there's no login required to get.
No, this is a public facing site. Anyone can use this. And again, if you don't know or forget how to make a comment on here, give us a call or an email. If you'd prefer to have a paper copy to review specifically for your community, we could provide that as well. Basically, we want to make it as easy as we can for you to provide feedback to us on these maps. So after this meeting, I have my business cards up there too. If there's another way you'd prefer, send me an email and we'll accommodate whatever works best for you. And we can go around to some of the other communities we have here as well. Hay Springs is here. So this is Clinton. Gordon was a little bit different, I know, because we have those high hazard dams upstream of Gordon that we did take into account since they were created for flood control purposes. So what happens with Gordon is we have some floodplain coming in this blue area, and then once it reaches town, essentially, it spreads out and is shallow flooding through the streets. So again, we have that scenario where it's just really shallow flooding in town. It's not a regulatory purchase requirement where we have this orange boundary. And then it picks up again further downstream of town.
Well, there's one upstream of Clinton too, and Antelope Creek drainage area. You surely got it on the map somewhere.
I think the only dams that were considered in our analysis were the two high hazard dams, which I think are just this one upstream of Gordon. I think there were two, and this guy here. Is that right? Does that look right? And our dam safety office, or the dam safety division for the state of Nebraska, works in the same office as us, so we work closely with them on these two instances. And this whole study is all zone A, which typically means that structures are not taken into account. With the exception, we couldn't really justify not including these two high hazard dams since they were built specifically for flood protection for the city of Gordon. Let's see, and then am I missing any other communities? I guess we can look at Hay Springs as well. I think they have a little bit. And here's what we have in Hay Springs. But again, anyone that's not in this meeting, please share with them that they can review and make comments as well. The more comments, the better. There's always going to be people that are, commenting after they go preliminary, especially when you start dealing with the public a little bit more. So the more we can get ahead of this, the better. And it's easy for us to go back at this point, like I said. All right, I think from here, I'll pass it back to Erin.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a little spiel about mitigation and how to reduce your community's flood risk. And there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing this. So like we've discussed, flooding is a known hazard, and especially in Nebraska, it's one of the most reported hazards in the state. And climate models are showing that it's going to continue to get worse, and it's going to be harder to predict when these storms and flood events happen. So mitigation is really going to be like your best friend in this, in protecting life and property. And so why does it make sense? It helps improve your community's resiliency, improving your community's resiliency is a big takeaway, because the faster you can recover from a disaster, the more likely your community will survive in the long run, and businesses can get up and running again. And mitigation really helps to build this resiliency. It can also decrease the cost of flood insurance for your community members. And it helps maintain a quality of life, being able to weather these events, but not have huge amounts of damage. So there are a variety of ways to mitigate from your traditional structural projects, such as dams and stuff, but there's also prevention and public information, property protection. And so I'll put on screen here just a variety of options. We've got planning and zoning with your ordinances and such. You've got the maps for public information, which is what are coming out now. Property protection, most well known as elevation, elevating your home above the base flood elevation. Natural resource protection, that is pretty much either keeping or returning your wetlands and your floodplains back to their natural state. So that could be buyouts, property acquisition, that kind of thing. And then working with your local emergency managers, they can help with flood warning and flood response stuff. Protect your critical facilities, so like your hospitals, your schools, your fire stations, and then your traditional structural projects, so your reservoirs, your culverts, that kind of thing. One resource that we at the state have produced is the State Flood Hazard Mitigation Plan. So this came out in 2022, so fairly recent still, and it has a whole host of flood-related data and funding opportunities and other risk data that you can incorporate in local hazard mitigation plans if that's something that your community is currently working on. It's available on our website, so feel free to look through whenever you get a chance. And then another solution for mitigation that we like to discuss is nature-based solutions. So this ties in with that natural resources protection kind of, where you're working with nature and more green space kind of things rather than your traditional concrete gray infrastructure. And this image just shows an example of a grass waterway. So having the little strip of grass there and the root system can hold the dirt and such more so and prevents erosion that you see on the left-hand side. Other local nature-based solution objects include, stormwater bioswales, which is on the left-hand side, or rain barrels on a local scale to just reduce the runoff to your community's stormwater management facilities and such. And if you're interested in learning more about nature-based solutions, FEMA has a whole guidebook about nature-based solutions, and there's a variety, even more examples in this than what we discussed here. So I believe this is also on our website. So feel free to take a look at our website, see all the resources we have to offer. And like we discussed a little earlier, your local floodplain management ordinance is it's a big part of managing your floodplain because it outlines the your authority for regulating the area, the building standards, how you can build safely there. And we have a model floodplain management ordinance on our website that you can use as a template to update your current if it needs it. We are currently working on a new model ordinance that we're hoping to be available by spring of 2025. Because the last major overhaul we did was back in 2017. And so having an up-to-date ordinance now will make it easier to adopt the new maps. It'll make the process of adopting the new maps in a couple of years a lot easier because you don't have to go through the whole ordinance adoption process then. You just get it out of the way now. And if you're interested in updating your floodplain management ordinance, feel free to reach out to me. I put some business cards on the table with my contact information. The title is my old title, so sorry about that. But yeah, feel free to reach out if you want to update your floodplain management ordinance. I can help you do that. And then critical facilities. So we touched a little bit about this, but it's your schools, your fire stations, your police stations. And it's important to safeguard these because they are what needs to be there in times of response. And there is grant funding available to help safeguard your critical facilities or update them if they're in a high hazard area, such as the floodplain. And flood insurance. This is something that we strongly encourage for communities and communities residents to have. Flood insurance is really what's gonna save you in times of flooding because many homeowners insurance policies don't cover flooding. And so flood insurance will help homeowners and community members recover if they flood. And a big benefit that we like to discuss is this increased cost of compliance clause or policy, I guess. So increased cost of compliance is a funding source for property owners if they have a flood insurance policy and they need to bring their home or business into compliance with the local ordinance. This allows up to $30,000 of additional funding to bring it into compliance with local codes and regulations. And so one of the things that increased cost of compliance can help with is home elevation. So elevation is probably the most known mitigation effort for properties and homeowners. And there's a variety of different ways you can elevate a home or structure. Like these top two photos, they're on like posts or piers, or you can put it on top of a garage and use the space underneath your home. And lastly, there are buyouts and relocations, property acquisition. It is, it helps restore natural floodplain function by removing the structures and such and bringing it back to the grassland and such and allowing it to flood like it's supposed to. It saves a lot of properties from damage. And a good example that we like to discuss is Beatrice. So Beatrice, they had a great a buyout program. So for quite a few years, since 1973, they've been acquiring a variety of properties in their floodplain to bring it back to a natural floodplain function and turning it into parks and green space and recreational area. And their efforts really showed in 2015 when they had one of the largest floods on their record. Beatrice officials estimate they saved almost $13 million from this buyout project and turning it into recreational space. And so all of these mitigation efforts that I've talked about can be funded through grants. And these are just some examples of the grant funding that is available for your communities. Most of them are, dependent on being a National Flood Insurance Program participating community, which I'm sure all of you are. And if you're interested in learning more about any of the grant options that are available, you can reach out to your state hazard mitigation officer at NEMA, or you can talk to us and we can direct you to the right person. One thing that is important to note is the state of Nebraska has recently been awarded $10 million in FMA Swift Current funding, so flood mitigation assistance. And so one of the big things that it can help do is bring substantially damaged structures. So if they're damaged by flooding and they're substantially damaged, so 50% or more of damage costs for the value of the home, this funding can help bring that into compliance. And I guess lastly, if you have any projects in mind or you're looking to start soon, you can talk to us and we can direct you to the right grants or applications or give you ideas on what projects would probably work in the community.
Okay, so lastly, I just want to talk about next steps going forward with this project. So I mentioned this before, but each of your communities should be getting a letter from FEMA outlining that you have 30 days to review the draft maps and provide comments to us. Again, that date is a little loose. If you go a day past that or you're a little past that, still reach out to us. We can still work with you. Eventually, we will have to cut it off. I'm guessing we'll start actually working on moving those maps to preliminary sometime later this year or the start of next year. So at that point, it will be too late to provide any comments to us. You would have to go through a more official process if the maps are preliminary or we're working on preliminary. And once the maps become preliminary, it's usually about a 1.5 to 2 year process before they officially become effective. So I would anticipate somewhere in the 2026, 2027 range that these maps would be effective for Sheridan County. And this is the point in the project after when these maps are starting to work on preliminary, that we really pass the baton back to FEMA, and they can't kind of handle it from here to go through sort of the regulatory process to make these maps official. So next steps for all of you. Again, the big takeaway from this meeting is please review the maps, provide comments to us. Take my business card, let me know if there's another way you'd like to provide comments other than just doing it on our interactive map. But now is really the time that you can make the most impact on the future maps that go effective. So again, appreciate you all coming out, but please also do your homework as well and review the maps. And that's all we have for you. I have all of our contact up here as well. Again, my name's Stephen Chappé. Ryan Statsky's over here. Aaron's over there. You probably have also heard from Michelle York about this meeting. She's great. If you ever don't know who to talk to Michelle and she'll direct you. I also included Elijah on here. He's our state NFIP, National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator, recently added to that position. So he's a great contact to know as well. And then Brock Remus, he's also on the call today, but he's our representative from FEMA Region 7.
Can you access our old map on there? Or
Yeah.
is it just the new one?
Yeah, so
Or like
paper maps.
So we can know where if
Compare.
there was any changes.
Yes, so let me pull up the map again. So on our interactive map, we do have this effective paper map. That is your current effective boundary. However, it is geo-referenced to the best of our abilities. So if you're doing anything from a regulatory standpoint, we do ask that you actually look at the physical paper maps for determination. But yes, you can see them there, these black dots. And it's kind of hard to read on the interactive setting. There we go, a little better. But that would be the easiest way to compare the difference between the old versus what's coming. And these are still your regulatory boundaries for the next couple of years. So any development or anything that's happening within that boundary, you still have to regulate to that, even if it's outside of our new draft boundaries, at least until 2026-27 timeframe.
Yeah, go back to Clinton and go up west of there a mile, and there's a dam there that's part of the Antelope Creek that was put in to protect Gordon.
This guy?
Yeah, that's it. I think so.
Yeah. Okay. It does look like this one would have been taken into account because we don't have anything flowing downstream of it.
Okay. It's a drainable dam. It drains, you know what I mean? It empties itself out in between storms.
Yeah.
But that's the head of the Antelope Creek drainage area.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have anything picking up until just west of Clinton here.
But the old map down there below zone A or whatever they see, that's the old floodplain.
Yeah.
Little black dots.
Yep. So this was old. This doesn't look like we have anything here with the new draft maps. So there'll be some of that areas where there was floodplain before that there isn't now, and vice versa. You can see there's some boundary down here that wasn't included. It just looks like a low-lying area. So again, this goes back to kind of how the maps were made. We're dropping rainfall over a whole mesh rather than looking at just this particular stream and studying it. So we get a lot more floodplain that looks like this and just identifying sort of those lower areas that could just be essentially a bowl that the water is draining into.
So with that, with a lot of the Sheridan County area being sandhills, and you started this in 2017.
2021 is when the project started.
And so it'll finish maybe in
26 or 27.
So 10 years. I mean, sand moves around a lot. Will some of those maps still be
right? So I guess
correct with, I mean, the way the
yeah, I guess that's one of the things that why we need to update maps is because that flood risk changes, right? And these flood maps are really a snapshot in time. So yeah, the topography that we're using, the best available data we have is 2017. We don't have any data other than that we can necessarily use. If, you know, in 10 years time, there's been significant changes. There is a process to update maps called a letter of map revision that you can do a particular area, not a whole countywide study like we're doing here. So those avenues exist on a smaller scale. And if we want to, we move down south, you can kind of get a sense of what some of the maps look like.
Are you using drones or is it just on-site observation, or how do you come with that type of plan and what then?
So we now have statewide LiDAR is what it's called. So it's essentially a plane that shoots down radar signals to get elevation. And so we have a resolution of 1 meter by 1 meter across the whole state that we have elevation data for. So back in the 70s, we didn't have anything close to that when those previous maps were being done. So
I ask a question about the relocation resources. If we have, I'm just trying to find money wherever I can find money.
sure.
And so if we have derelict properties that fall and qualify for relocation funding, can we access it even if it's not occupied? Can we access that funding? So the property's there, we have a known property owner. The property falls within a area designated as qualifying for relocation. Can we access that funding under those circumstances?
Do you know?
I'm not 100% sure. I know it comes down to some of the grant funding requires an application. If these homes had flood insurance policies, they would probably qualify for the increased cost of compliance funding, but it's going to be dependent on having a policy.
Also have this something up front.
For increased cost of compliance coverage, they would have to have had an active flood insurance policy. Otherwise, you could look into one of the other grant funding opportunities that I know mitigation, relocation buyouts, mitigation, stuff like that would fall into one of the number of mitigation grant funds that were on screen. I think Adele on our team would probably know more.
Yeah, if you give someone on our team a call, we can find someone that might be able to answer better.
But do dams increase the mitigation? You know what I'm saying?
The better or worse?
Yeah. So I have 2 dams to
Sure.
protect Gordon, right? Because how we look at it, there's I don't have any at all, but there's no chance of flooding if I don't have it.
Yeah. The thing I hesitate with dams and levees is it can, people assume that they're protected no matter what, right? But it's protection up until a limit.
Right.
With any of
just
those
saw it
things.
happen in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Earlier this summer.
I lived in Oglala in 2002.
Yeah.
But before that dam was put in downtown Gordon, flooded all the.
Right. So yeah, it's more of a. I mean, it definitely is providing protection.
Oh, sure. And that's a dam that drains all the time. Empties itself out.
I mean, even with the dam there, we're still in a 100-year event showing there's potential for rainfall downstream of that dam. It's not protected, just a small area, but we're still getting that street flooding is what we are essentially seeing from our modeling in that event.
So we recently, on the east side of Gordon, we could be on out of Gordon. Yes. That's done, we installed some culverts and stuff like that. Does that make any difference to anything here?
So yeah, all of Sheridan County is what we consider zone A, or what FEMA considers zone A, which doesn't take structures into account. We sort of went a little above and beyond with the dam situation because it's such a, it's an important piece to Gordon's, flooding infrastructure, right? So, and we have that access to our dam safety team that we work closely with. So, but those are really the only structures that we actually looked at as being hydraulically significant. If there's other culverts that were put in, it's, I mean, typically those culverts aren't going to be handling the 100-year flood. They're not going to have much impact. If you want to put a comment in, we can sure look at a certain area where you know culverts have been put in and see if it would have an impact. I would say likely not, but we can at least look at it. It doesn't hurt. But yeah, typically zone A structures aren't taken into account. Where we would see structures taken into account would be more, it would be considered a zone AE study, or we call it an enhanced study. So like City of Lincoln and Omaha and some of the bigger communities where we're actually modeling, like Salt Creek through Lincoln just has an individual enhanced study. And one of those studies can take as long as a whole zone A study for a county. So it's a lot more in depth. But anymore, and for something like this, you guys don't have, you know, massive road structure that we can going over here.